Hello, everyone. We are talking about transformations in Europe this week, and some of our topics we'll be focusing on include the Protestant Reformation. We'll be discussing the Enlightenment, the Scientific Revolution, and all of the wars that went on between various European powers as they bicker and fight like small children over whose border belongs to who. So brace yourselves. It's going to be great. Before we dive in, though, let's talk about the royal family trees. The House of Tudor. Very short lived, even though you'll see a lot of names on here. Most of those names are Henry's various wives. You'll notice Catherine of Aragon appears twice. First to Arthur. Arthur dies with the sweat. Catherine then marries Henry, who becomes Henry VIII. And wives 2 through 6. His 3 children from wives 1, 2, and 3. And unfortunately, the dynasty ends with Elizabeth. She does not marry, has no children, and eventually her cousin becomes James I of England with the House of Stuart. In France, what's happening? The Valois dynasty. Take a look at these names that repeat. Some ones that stick out. Look for the Louis. Notice Catherine Medici. Yes, that is one of the same Catherine from Italy, of the famous Medici family. We have Louis the 12th up here. So eventually we will get into Louis the 14th. Later on, we'll discuss Louis the 16th and how things didn't go so well for him. And the House of Habsburg. They're everywhere, folks. Because we've got some very important players. We've got Ferdinand and Isabella, whose daughter, Catherine of Aragon, eventually makes it to England. Charles V, very important because he is Charles V and Charles I. We'll talk about why later on. Philip II of Spain ends up marrying Mary of England. Leopold, Joseph, Maria Therese, mother of Marie Antoinette. So diving right in, post-classical Europe, a review. Fall of the Roman Empire. The Byzantine Empire leads to the feudal system. Some important documents include the Magna Carta. Eventually, we're going to get into the English Bill of Rights because that will then discuss the Glorious Revolution. But let's talk about European governments for a minute. We've got 3 new developments happening. You've got the rise of the nation states. And what is a nation state? It is a political unit consisting of an autonomous state, meaning they alone govern themselves, inhabited by people who share some kind of common culture, history, or language. With that, you have the rise of the absolute monarchy. The monarch was the source of power in the state. He's not legally bound by any constitution either. Notice I say he because you have very few female absolute monarchs. The rise of the limited monarchy will occur later because you have parliamentary monarchy, aka a constitutional monarchy. England and the Netherlands will be the first examples of this. The monarch acted as a head of state within the parameters of a constitution, meaning there were certain limitations that were placed on his or her power. So, quick name list for you. Some very important people: Habsburg, the Bourbons, the Stuarts, the Tudors, and the major players we'll be discussing. Look at the popes, Clement and Leo. We have Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire, aka Charles I of Spain, aka nephew Catherine of Aragon, who was the first wife of Henry VIII. We have Francis I of France. Say that 12 times fast. I might even give you a cookie. We'll also be discussing wives 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. That would be Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr, whose husband was actually dying. Not dead, but dying when Henry began courting her. Also want to let you guys know, cousins related by marriage. So we've got, they actually knew each other, albeit briefly, but they knew each other, folks. They were cousins. She was a very young child when Anne Boleyn had her head cut off. And through marriage, these 4 women, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, and Catherine's 5 and 6 are related. Which is ironic because that was the argument Henry used to get rid of this wife and this wife. We can talk more about that later. More major players. We've got Louis the 14th of France, aka Louis the Sun King. We have Queen Mary the First of England and her husband King Philip II of Spain, and then for a brief 2 years, England. And then she dies. Her sister from Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth I, becomes Elizabeth I, Queen of England, does not marry. Philip begins to court Elizabeth. That's just great. She says no, you get a war. We have James, important player, he matters. We have William and Mary, Glorious Revolution, and the Charles I and the Second. The early Reformation, let's talk about this. The German monk, Martin Luther, is a very important man. We'll find out why. In 1500, the Catholic Church, which had benefited obviously from European prosperity, was building new churches, including a new St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Pope Leo X raised money for this new basilica by authorizing the sale of indulgences, which basically means donate money to the church and you will reserve your spot in heaven. Think of when you tip the maitre d' at a nice restaurant so you can get a good table. It's kind of like that, except you're literally buying salvation. You can be the worst human being in the world. You can kill puppies. But as long as you pay these indulgences, you have bought your place in heaven. And Martin Luther had a problem with that. He challenged the Pope on the issue of indulgences and other practices that he considered incredibly corrupt within the Catholic Church or just not Christian. Luther began the Protestant Reformation, arguing that salvation could be by faith alone, not necessarily by deeds like purchasing of indulgences. He argued that the Christian belief could be based only on the Bible and on tradition, not the authority of the Pope. That's why he was excommunicated. The Protestant leader John Calvin formulated a different theological position on the institutes of the Christian religion. Calvin argued that salvation was God's gift to those who were predestined, and that Christian congregations should be self-governing and stress simplicity in life and in worship, which is why Calvinist churches are often bare and Calvinists themselves dressed in simple black attire. The Protestant Reformation appealed not only to religious sentiments, but also to Luther's fellow Germans, and to peasant and urban workers who wanted to reject the religion of their masters, and people who couldn't afford the indulgences. So this is a map of religion in Europe by 1555. The Lutheran religion spreads throughout the Holy Roman Empire and up into the Scandinavian countries. Very nice, very nice. We have the Calvinists. They're actually kind of limited. Right here. We have the Church of England, ironically enough. Oh, wait, who saw that coming? Only in England. We have the Roman Catholic Church, which for the most part is, the majority of Europe at this time period. And then Orthodox in Greece going on into Russia. The Counter-Reformation. Let's talk about that. The Catholic Church agreed on a number of internal reforms and a sort of a reaffirmation of fundamental Catholic beliefs in the Council of Trent, where basically they agreed they were doing everything right. These responses to the Protestant Reformation, along with the activities of the newly established Society of Jesus, also called the Jesuits, comprised the Catholic Reformation. The Protestant Reformation led to a number of wars of religion, the last of them concluded in 1648. And these included civil wars and conflicts between different parts of empires. The Reformation led to fundamental changes in the relationship of church and state. And some rulers, like Henry VIII, actually created their own religion, such as the Church of England. And Henry made himself the head. Other rulers, like Henry IV of France, accepted religious plurality in issuing the Edict of Nantes. And we'll talk more about that later. Henry actually created the Church of England because he wanted to divorce Catherine of Aragon, who was married to his brother, so he could marry Anne Boleyn. Catherine was about 6 years older than Henry, and unfortunately, she was never able to deliver a healthy son. She actually did give birth to a living son. He died a month later. And all of her children actually died, with the exception of one daughter who would become Queen of England. That would be Mary. Anne Boleyn, after Henry is able to divorce Catherine by separating from the Catholic Church, forming his own church, and having that marriage annulled, he marries Anne Boleyn. And Anne Boleyn, unfortunately, has a biological condition, if you will. She's Rh negative. It's a factor of the blood. And women who are Rh negative, if they are married to a man who is Rh positive, need to actually have 3 injections during their pregnancy. Otherwise, what will happen is they'll develop an autoimmune disorder and their body will attack a fetus, generally resulting in miscarriages. So Anne Boleyn was able to carry and deliver a healthy baby girl, Queen Elizabeth I, but after that, on record, had at least 3 miscarriages. And most people do believe now that is the Rh factor. Ironically enough, Henry then annuls his marriage to Anne Boleyn based on the fact that because he had relations with Anne's sister Mary and they had at least one child together, he never should have married Anne in the first place. Which could be an argument, except he used that same argument to divorce Catherine because Catherine of Aragon was married to Henry's brother first. And he already had relations with Mary before he married Anne, while still married to Catherine. So, yeah, we'll just stick with hypocrite for now. So what was the Edict of Nantes? It was a law made and signed by Henry IV of France, and basically it granted a large measure of religious liberty to his Protestant subjects, aka the Huguenots. And the edict upheld that Protestants could worship in many parts of the kingdoms, but not in Paris. It granted them full civil rights. They had a special court to deal with disputes arising between Protestants and Catholics. Protestant pastors were paid by the state, the same way the Catholics were. And finally, the Protestants could keep the places they were holding in August of 1597 as strongholds. Basically, the places they had set up and established, they were allowed to keep. This is actually pretty revolutionary, given the time period, religious freedom. And a time when witches were being burned at the stake, when people are fleeing England because they're being persecuted. Let's not forget that little, what was it called? The Reconquista and the Spanish Inquisition. That little blip. So again, pretty radical. And here's the thing, a couple things you want to know. The French Wars of Religion. Peace of Augsburg in Germany allows rulers to choose religion for their region, which is why most of them ended up choosing Protestantism. Couple of things you should know about. Look at the years. Philip is named King of Spain. Elizabeth becomes Queen of England. Anti-Protestant edicts begin occurring. You've got multiple wars. Focusing on here, English defeats the Spanish Armada. Good for you, Elizabeth. And Henry IV converts to Catholicism, but then issues the Edict of Nantes. And then he's assassinated. His successor takes the throne. Louis XIII, Louis XIV revokes the Edict of Nantes. So let's talk about some local tradition and religions, and apparently that includes burning witches. European concepts of the natural world were derived from both religion and folk customs. Most people believe that natural events could have supernatural causes. Belief in the supernatural is vividly demonstrated in the witch hunts of the late 16th and early 17th centuries. In the witch hunts, over 100,000 people, 75% of them were women, FYI, were tried, and about half of them were actually executed on charges of witchcraft. Often they were burned at the stake, but sometimes they were drowned in the river. The reason for witch hunts are many, but first and foremost is a tension between traditional beliefs and new religious and political institutions. So, focus on the drawings here. We've got burning at the stake. We've got the are you a witch? No. Okay, dunk her in the river. And if she died, she wasn't a witch, but at least her soul is in heaven now. And if she didn't drown, well, she's a witch. And we must burn her. All of this, though, led to the scientific revolution. 17th century European intellectuals were divided between the ancients and the moderns. And traditional view was that humanity was fallen from God's grace because of original sin. Moderns believed that humans were endowed with reason. And European intellectuals derived their understanding of the natural world from the writings of the Greeks and the Romans. These writings suggested that everything on Earth was reducible to 4 elements, and that the sun, moon, planets, and stars were so light and pure they floated in crystalline spheres and rotated around the Earth in perfectly circular orbits. The observations of Nicholas Copernicus published his theory on the heliocentric solar system. And Galileo, we all know who he is, but Galileo upset church authorities by proving that the Earth rotated around the sun, and he was then put on house arrest for the rest of his life. Royal and noble patrons promoted new sciences, especially emphasizing rationalism. New scientific thought became global when it was applied politically and militarily by Europeans. Copernicus and other scientists, including Galileo, undermined the Earth centered model of the universe and led to the introduction of the Copernican sun centered or heliocentric model. The Copernican model was initially criticized and suppressed by Protestant leaders and by the Catholic Church. Despite opposition, printed books spread these and other new ideas among European intellectuals. Isaac Newton's discovery of the law of gravity showed how natural laws govern all physical objects. Sorry, guys. Actually, while I'm over here, Newton's laws, we'll talk about him in just a minute, a bit more on Isaac Newton. But anyway, going back, Newton's discoveries led to the development of Newtonian physics. However, Newton and other scientists did not believe that their discoveries were in conflict with religious belief. Newton would become president of the Royal Society and Assembly of Scientists. We also have Rene Descartes, who believed that systematic doubt was the key to knowledge, Sir Francis Bacon, who believed that doubt produced knowledge. The trend in Western intellectual thought was to emphasize human possibility. The new science and religion were no longer necessarily opposed to one another. So here we have the sun as the center. Copernicus, Newton, some very important people. We're going to wrap up for today. We'll pick up later with the European Enlightenment, moving on to more new ideas and thought. If you have any questions, shoot me an email. Otherwise, have a great day, guys. Cheers.